Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I am super excited to be having this conversation with someone I am getting to know. Their name is Kinsey. They are a member of my online community, the waiting room, and we kind of got to know each other through that, but we have so much in common. And I'm really excited about this talk because I just think we have a lot to talk about, and Anne has a lot of lived experience and knowledge and wisdom that they are going to impart today. No pressure. So without further ado, I'm going to let Anne introduce themselves.
Asher, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Anne, and I am a fat, queer, trauma-informed trauma recovery professional and writer living in North Carolina in the United States across the pond. And I'm currently in the process of writing a book, running a nonprofit, providing human trafficking consulting services, amongst other things. I'm really excited to talk today and have a conversation. We do have a lot in common. And also, I think that the intersection between your work and what I'm doing is really fascinating. And so I can't wait to get into it.
Amazing. Well, that's just set up the entire podcast. Thanks for that. I'm really glad that someone's paying attention and knows what they're doing, not me. So tell us more about your work because it's like I'm fascinated by it. So tell us more. I love the way you worded it. What did you say? Trauma informed professional or something like you didn't kind of you gave it.
Trauma-informed trauma recovery professional.
That's
Yes.
a really good way of putting it. And so can you explain kind of what that involves, what your work's like?
Absolutely. So I am really interested in how neuroscience can help us to address how trauma has impacted our minds and bodies without always having to relive our traumas in order to heal from them. So trauma has a really significant impact on like how our brains function, right? It impacts the hippocampus and how we process memory. It makes our amygdala go on hyper alert and be ready to come to our rescue at any given moment, which then can make it more challenging for the frontal areas of our brain where we have like decision making and planning and all that good stuff going on, make it harder for those areas of our brains to function well. Then if you add on to that those of us who might be neurodiverse on top of it, um, trauma recovery can be challenging, but what I'm fascinated by are all the modalities and tools available to help people address how trauma has impacted them without having to sit down and share all of our traumas. Because, especially those of us who have intersectional identities and live with trauma just from making our way through the world, and those of us who may have had developmental trauma growing up or relational trauma growing up, relational trauma a little bit later on, there are too many incidents of trauma to sit down and talk through each one and
Mm.
find resolution for each one. I could sit in trauma therapy for the next 40 years and still not process every single incident. However, what I can do is go in with something like neurofeedback, where we put EEG sensors like on the scalp,
Mm.
um, and let my computer give feedback to my brain about how it's functioning so that it can on its own learn to function more optimally and resolve my trauma responses that way. So instead of sitting and talking through things for the next 40 years, I can talk through the most significant things in therapy. Sure, that's helpful. But in as I'm doing that, I can address the broader underlying impact of trauma so that I don't have to resolve every single incident. It sort of resolves or calms on its own. So neurofeedback is one of those things that we do. And I kind of, hinted, we put EEG sensors on the scalp. The client sits in front of like a TV screen and either watches a movie or plays a video game, and the screen will get bigger or smaller, lighter or darker. The sound gets louder or softer, depending on what the client's brain is doing. And without the client sitting there trying to figure out what all that means, the brain sort of unconsciously, subconsciously takes that information in and automatically self regulates itself to form new baselines for functioning that don't involve so much hyper arousal, so much fight, flight, freeze, fawn response like that we get from trauma. So that is neurofeedback. Another thing that I do in my work is HRV biofeedback. So heart rate variability. A lot of people think that they want their heart rate to be like super regular, super, rigid. No, no. We actually want it. I mean, you would know as a physician that would be part of your work, but we want variability in there. We want flexibility in there. And when there is flexibility in that HRV, it's a sign that multiple systems in the body are working together well. So for HRV biofeedback, I use this device called the HeartMath Inner Balance Sensor, and it clips to the earlobe on the client. I use it myself. By the way, all the tools that I use are things that I actually use myself. But it clips to the earlobe and then it connects via Bluetooth to a phone. We also have another device that we can use that doesn't require a phone, but most people who have a phone choose to use the Inner Balance. And the heart rhythm will show up on the screen, and then it gives the client feedback via like a mandala that gets bigger and smaller, to help with breath pacing. And then it will show red, yellow, or green coherence. Coherence score is just a measure of how flexible is your heart rate, how much resilience is your body showing right now. Then we use a variety of breathing techniques and visualization techniques to help people increase their HRV and create a new, more resilient and relaxed yet alert baseline. So unlike something like meditation, which I also love, but unlike meditation, HRV biofeedback is not getting people to be super duper relaxed all the time. You want to think in terms of a continuum where on, one end of the continuum, you're super relaxed, like almost about to fall asleep. The other end of the continuum, you are really activated and you're either super excited or maybe ready to fight. And what we want is to meet in the middle. And that's what the HRV biofeedback does, is helps people create that baseline in the middle. So that's another thing that I do in my work. I also use neuromodulation with clients. So we have neurofeedback, right? That's feedback to our brain. Our brains are learning now what to do. Neuromodulation says, okay, we're having trauma responses in the brain. We can use some sort of stimulation, whether that be very gentle electrical or like a vibration stimulation, in order to impact how the brain is functioning that way. There are two devices that I use for that in my work. One is the Alpha Stim device that uses ear clips where you put a little bit of conductive solution on the ear clips and you stick it on your ears and adjust the settings so that the person just feels good, relaxed, happy, at ease. And then you wear it as you go about your activities, but you cannot drive with it on, though. You can do anything other than drive with it on. But I have worked with it on, I've done the laundry with it on, I've written with it on, all kinds of things. So you can go about your regular everyday activities, wear it anywhere from 15 minutes to 3 hours, depending on what kinds of issues the person is wanting to address. By using it, they have tested it with anxiety, depression, and insomnia. Also, pain, chronic pain. And there are different pain um, pads that you can use, like on your body where you're experiencing pain, to help with that. Similar to a TENS, but different. If you ever get curious to look up on the difference of the technology, it's just the way that the electrical current works is different with alpha stim. In the States, you have to have a prescription for the alpha stim. I believe in other parts of the world, you don't, which is interesting. Um, yeah, the other device we use is called the Apollo wearable, and it's a wristband that you wear on your arm. They also have where you can actually clip it to your clothes and use it near your collarbone too. I haven't had a client do that, but I know that's possible. But most people wear it on like their wrist, and it interacts with the vagus nerve, and you can set it to provide a wide range of effects for you. You could have it to be really calming. You could have it set to like a recovery mode to, help you rebound after emotional stress or physical stress or illness. You can set it to social mode, which helps you connect more easily with others. As a neurodivergent person, that's helpful for me so I don't get overwhelmed in social settings. It's also really good when you want to do creative work, the social setting is. And then there's like focus. So also that's another good one when my brain is like squirrels running everywhere. The the focus piece is really, really helpful. So those are all tools that I use in my work. I have a private practice, so I see clients individually that way. I also run a nonprofit that works with survivors of human trafficking and their family members. And the people who receive services through the nonprofit, of course, receive those services free of charge. And accessibility to trauma recovery services is a huge passion of mine. Making sure that people who need the services most can access them, marginalized folks in particular, having easier access to services is really important. And that's also why I'm writing the book that I'm writing, because I don't know what mental health care services cost in other parts of the world, but I know here it can be between $100 and $150 per hour to meet with someone to help with trauma recovery. And a lot of marginalized folks don't have that kind of money. So with the
This
book,
is I want to get to the book, definitely want to get to the book. But before we do, this has all been really fascinating. I didn't know any of this at all. I'd never heard of any of these devices. We'll now be Googling all of them. Thank you very much. Plenty to go home and do some research about. The thing I'm finding most interesting as someone who is, I would like to say trauma informed, but is by no means an expert. One of the things I am noticing with a lot of my clients is that oftentimes, especially because the people I see carry often or multiple marginalized identities, so they're often neurodivergent, and are almost certainly fat, and oftentimes hold other marginalized identities, and oftentimes have experienced a lot of trauma. And so I spend time talking about medical trauma because that's my bit, but you can't just isolate medical trauma with a background of all this other trauma. So of course we get into childhood trauma, and unsurprisingly there's a lot of that. And sometimes it can be so overwhelming. Like you said, like just trying to sort of come to terms with one T out of all the T's can take such a long time. And we might not have the time or the resources, the money or whatever. And people always like therapy. Therapy is the solution. And hey, I've been going to therapy for years. I'm a big believer in therapy, but I also appreciate that it's not possible for everybody. And even if it is possible for everybody, it doesn't work the same way. It's like exercise, exercise doesn't cure everything, neither does therapy. So it's fascinating to me that there are other options and that you're talking about kind of trauma recovery in a way that has very little to do with talking and much more to do with like resetting the brain. So that's like, when somebody who has all of this knowledge and experience, are there things that people can do, and perhaps the books will come into it, are there things that people can do that, for example, can't get hold of this machine or whatever, like, are there things that we can be doing that isn't just talking, that goes beyond that when it comes to dealing with trauma?
Absolutely. I think that having a growing awareness of simple tools that folks can use is really important to make healing more accessible to more people. The other piece with talking that can be difficult is that we get dissociation a lot of times
Mm,
with trauma. And some of us, myself included, have dissociative disorders. And so talking can be not only difficult, but like counterproductive.
right.
Not always. There are some things that I need to talk about that most of us need to talk about, but to start there, to have that as a starting place can be triggering and counterproductive for some people. Not
Mm,
all people, but some people. So, yes, one of the things that I love about something like heart math is that the techniques that we use in heart math are techniques that people can use with or without the device.
right.
You don't have to purchase the device to gain the benefits of the exercises. You won't get the feedback on the screen, but you should still feel a difference inside of you, right?
Mm,
I remember the first time that I went for my personal heart math appointment for the very first time with a biofeedback therapist. And I was tied up in knots. In fact, I was sort of deconstructing some things at the time, and it had me stressed out and activated. And she said to me, okay, focus on the area of your heart. Breathe in and out through the area of your heart a little more gently and easily than usual. And like, I wanted to cry. It was such a relief to pause and to go to that space. And it wasn't somebody telling me to take deep breaths or here, breathe based on this counting to four,
mm,
which as a trauma survivor can be triggering because it's not allowing me to choose what feels safe and right for me in my body,
mm,
but just focusing on the area of the heart and letting the breath flow in and out through the area of the heart. And I get to be in charge of how that happens. It was such like a warm blanket of relief in that moment, just breathing in and out through the heart. And I would say that, I mean, I learned other techniques as we built on that. But probably the first month or two, simply pausing to do that throughout my day brought me so much relief that, I mean, honestly, I started making different choices with this whole deconstruction issue. I, changed up relationships in my life, and it all started from this heart focused breathing because it was getting my body out of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn.
right.
So then I could think again, like my frontal lobe could come back online and I could make decisions that were resonant with who I really was as a person versus decisions based in how do I survive. So that is one excellent starting point that I think a lot of people might consider. And I will also say if the area of the heart is for some reason not helpful or it is triggering for a person because of where that is on the body, you can choose anywhere you want.
Mhm.
Choose a place in the body that feels safe for you. Maybe it is your big toe, or maybe it is your hand or the top of your head or whatever it might be. So just kind of tapping into the fact that like we all have different ideas about what feels safe or cozy or healing in our bodies, and we can choose to breathe there, and we can choose how we breathe.
It's such a gentle, just as you're explaining it, it feels really gentle and it feels very kind and nourishing and just really peaceful. This idea of just focusing on one particular part of your body and choosing that part of your body and not having to sort of subscribe to a certain pattern. Don't you think that a lot of, I'm going to say healthcare for want of a better word, is about prescribing things to people? Like, there's always if you do this and if you do this and if you do this and if you do this, then you'll get better. And I always found that as a trauma survivor really hard to do, because one of the biggest things about trauma is your autonomy, your power is gone. And then here are people who are supposedly trying to help you, but they're just, they have power now. They take on that power, and it never feels like you have any control over. I don't want to say your recovery, but your ability to process what's happened to you. Whereas this feels like a very much like you're in charge of this. Like you pick the right place and the right way to do it, and not having to talk about it. A lot of people I speak to, like, they're talking about it just because it takes you into the moment. And if you're not careful, you can stay there. It's very difficult, especially if you have a history of, as I say, dissociating, or people who have a history of post-traumatic
Mhm.
stress, especially if you have flashbacks, especially if you are prone
Mhm.
to looping in those flashbacks. And sometimes I've personal experience of, like, I've gone and I've talked about it, and then I'm just looping over and over and over and over and over, and I can't escape. It's like being in a, I don't know, like some kind of fairground ride and not being able to get off. And so you're right, like sometimes there needs to be something else. And I love hearing all the different options that are available. Tell me a bit about the book. Like, what's the plan for the book? What are you hoping to be able to pass on to people?
Absolutely. So the book is also ultimately about accessibility to trauma recovery options for the masses, for
Mm,
people who typically might have a harder time accessing services. Also, a lot of the books on the market are very academic in tone. And even as somebody who went to school for this, when I found myself in my own mental health crisis due to my trauma responses, I could not digest
yeah,
the book. They
yeah,
felt like almost like they were objectifying me. I was their little
yeah,
lab rat to experiment on.
yeah,
And I needed something that was going to feel like it was giving me a safe hug. And that was not it. So I'm hoping that the book that I'm currently writing will feel like a warm hug for people, and that it will, for those who need to understand why they can't just get past their trauma, why that is from a neuroscience perspective, to validate their experiences, that really they're doing their best. They're remarkable. Their bodies are remarkable. Their minds are remarkable for helping them to survive and get to this point. And then that's the first quarter or so of the book. And then the other 3 quarters of the book are basically a smorgasbord of options for different ways to find healing in a wide range of price ranges and accessibility, and things that people can open the book when they're in emotional pain and find something to provide at least a little bit of relief, and hopefully build on that over time in order to experience greater healing, greater trauma processing, and greater freedom from these trauma responses that we often experience. That's what I'm trying to do there. And I like what you have just said about the experience of not having choice in medical environments.
Mm,
And for that reason, in fact, also why I like what you're doing in the work you're doing with the courses that you're offering people to learn how to advocate for their needs and for basic human respect and decency in medical environments. And that is a huge tool for trauma recovery as well. And I mean, I found your work through my own processing of my own medical trauma.
mm.
So,
It's really interesting you say that. One of the things that I'm beginning to realize, and I think you'll probably agree with me, and there's probably like a really like clever reason for this, but I don't know. I'm sure you'll tell me, but um, is just a lack of tenderness and warmth and just kind of, because we as doctors, we put our hands on people all the time. Sometimes we put our
mhm,
hands into people, which is even more
yeah.
traumatic. But even just touching people, examining a knee, or listening to someone's chest, like auscultating, like all of those things, actually, even just looking in someone's ear, it's a hands-on experience. And I
Mhm,
think we know that communication is primarily non-verbal, and there's something about the kind of touching of patients, like, and I don't mean this to come across as weird, you know what I mean, like physically touching a patient that
mhm,
lacks the warmth or the nurturing or the healing that is essentially intended. Like this is what we're meant to be doing. We're supposed to be bringing healing to people. You can't heal people if your touch is radiating disgust or
mm,
kind of whatever, like unconscious bias. And I think, you know, I think there is a reason why doctors are less inclined to examine their fat patients, and we have evidence to support this. But I just wonder a lot about the kind of not just touch, but also just kind of like the warmth and the kindness and the healing that we should be radiating as healthcare professionals that we don't. And there are certain groups of people that I think, like if like if our temperature is kind of like a medium for some people and maybe warm for some people, when it comes to marginalized bodies, it's cold, sometimes very
mhm,
cold, and sometimes freezing.
mhm,
And people get that, and I think that in of itself is actually very traumatizing, having to go and see a doctor that is perhaps physically repulsed by you but just like lacks the basic human kindness, compassion, warmth, tenderness that we should be. And there's something I keep thinking about, like the
mhm,
physical kind of aspect of the consultation and how hurtful sometimes that can be, because we kind of know about the words, we kind of know about the things that people are saying, but I wanted to focus more on what people are not saying and what people are doing as well, because I think that's just a thought that popped into my head from what you were saying, and I don't even know why.
I think it's an important thought, and it has a lot to do with this idea of co-regulation.
Mm,
So, our nervous systems actually communicate with one another when we're in each other's presence, even when we're not touching, but even more so when we are touching. So, for instance, if I'm activated and I come see you and you are well regulated and you are talking with me and you are, say, you're a physician who's examining me and your hands touch me, and then my nervous system picks up on the signals from your nervous system that says, this is a safe person, this is a safe place. I don't have to be on high alert here. And it can change how my nervous system is functioning just because your nervous system is functioning in a well regulated, calm way. Conversely, though, if I walk into a medical appointment, and I think a lot of us have had this experience, and that physician is not well regulated, either because they're disgusted by me or they have their unconscious bias or whatever there might be, or they've been working for 14 hours and
Mm,
haven't eaten anything, and or they're at the end of their personal rope, so they are activated, or something tragic happened with a patient and they haven't had time to process it yet. So their nervous system is dysregulated, and I come in and I'm already scared and activated because I have past medical trauma. And then they walk in the room and they're dysregulated as well. Our nervous systems are talking to each other, and their nervous system is going to be saying to my nervous system, I am not a safe person. This is not a safe space. I'm activated too. We should all be activated. In fact, let's get more activated. So then everything in me is going to go in high alert. Like, they're going to take my blood pressure and it's going to be off the chart. My heart rate's going to be really high. And like my breath rate is going to be high.
mhm,
And then I'm also going to be less receptive as well to anything that's said to me.
mhm.
I'm not going to be in a space to share
Yeah.
empathetic communication, or to share of my experiences, even to communicate well with the doctor and give details about what's going on with me. So um I think about how when we go into like a fat positive massage space or energy workspace, how those professionals, so much of their training is about centering themselves with breath and energetically and spiritually, and warming up their hands and being a healing presence. And I think that I mean, it does wonders for our nervous systems in that environment. So what if we took that kind of approach into a
Mm,
medical setting, and how would that be different
mm.
for us, even amongst like our fat positive doctors who are out there, if they consciously made that choice to be well regulated walking into the room as well. Yeah.
I love that. I love that you just explained it, and I know there's going to be so many people listening who just had like a light bulb moment and went, "Oh, that explains so much." Because sometimes you can walk out of an appointment and think there wasn't one particular thing that I can put my finger on that went terribly wrong, but the whole experience felt, sometimes the word is icky or just painful or shaming or traumatized, but you couldn't even say why exactly. And I think just listening to what you just said, I'm going to have to play that back several times to really let that sink in. But also the healer or the healthcare professional in me, as you were talking about it, it makes me think of when I'm treating children.
Hmm.
Subconsciously, I am coming from a place of I need to somehow communicate with this child that I'm safe because it's a
Mm.
child, and it kicks in a sort of maternal instinct, paternal instinct, or parental instinct that kind of goes, no, I've got to make this child feel safe. And so it absolutely changes the way we talk to children. But even if it's not talking, just examining children is a completely different thing than examining an adult. But why should it be? Why should we make that effort to be calm and to regulate our own nervous system? Because I know I do. When I'm dealing with a child, automatically do it. When I'm dealing with a dying patient, I do it. When I'm dealing with a patient that has just experienced a major physical trauma, like it has been injured or it's something serious, I am doing everything I can to radiate calm. I am breathing. I am doing it intentionally or but subconsciously. It's become, natural to me. But we don't make that like you say, like just normal practice, but we perhaps should be. And that's given me so much food for thought. Do you think you could, I'm not gonna say dumb it down, that's a horrible thing to say. What am I trying sort of make it like super basic? Could you explain the impact that trauma has on the brain and the body? But like in a like super like don't know a thing, don't know anything about it, just basic level.
Absolutely. So essentially, trauma is when something happens to us that is beyond our ability to cope. So, what happens to one person that is a trauma may or may not be a trauma to another person. The question is, do we have the skills, the resources, and the support to cope with and process this thing that has just happened? If the answer is yes, it may be a difficult life experience, but it may not impact our minds and bodies in the same way as if we don't have those skills to process. And that's when it's trauma. Also, I want to make really clear it's not our fault if we don't have the skills necessary to cope with that situation, because traumas are situations nobody should have to cope with. They're not something we can plan for,
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't have to plan for. So it's not ever your fault or anybody's fault when they don't have the coping ability to process something. But when we don't have the ability to process something, our brain goes, hey, let me help you survive.
Mm.
When it does that, it changes how it functions so that it can be more efficient, as if like a bear is chasing us. We're trying to run away, right? So the bear is chasing us and we're trying to run away, then the brain is going to change how it deals with memory. It's going to focus more on this moment now and getting away from the bear. Memory will become more choppy because we're actually diverting resources in our body to like increase blood flow to our heart and to other muscles and to release like adrenaline into the body, which is like a mega dose of like, think caffeine, but more. Give us a big push so that we are strong enough and fast enough to run away from the bear. And so it's actually really phenomenal what our bodies do to help us survive these traumas. What can happen is when a trauma is severe enough, or we have enough smaller traumas that we're sitting in trauma soup, then all these chemicals that are released into our bloodstream, the adrenaline, cortisol, all that kind of stuff, norepinephrine, right, uh, will sit in our bodies. We're like flooded with it. So instead of it being this occasional thing to help us run away from the bear, our body's like, we're always running from the bear,
Mm-hmm.
which is exhausting.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. And we get tapped out, and all those things in our bloodstream constantly causes inflammation
Mm-hmm.
in our bodies, which is why so many of us who are trauma survivors have more chronic health conditions.
Yeah.
So if we want to break it down really simply, that's how it works. And if your brain is still running from the bear all the time and probably has really good reason why it thinks it needs to, right? But then our resiliency in the face of everyday stressors becomes a lot smaller. So, it might be that we have a much shorter fuse than somebody who hasn't been through some of the things that we've been through. Or it might be that part of the way our brain keeps running from the bear is to say, oh, this is so much trauma. I need to segment it out into different compartments. And then our brain checks out. It has all these different compartments and we can dissociate. And we might dissociate into a compartment that only carries some of our difficult memories, but not all of them because it's easier to function there. And then we may have different dissociative parts that can handle different things in life. We may dissociate into one part that can handle the going to work bit. And then we have another part that can handle the raising of the kids bit, and another part that can handle the children bit, and another part that can deal with the chaos of shopping in the supermarket or whatever. So but whatever it is, trauma can cause our brains to do that to protect us. And
Mm.
so if it feels like we're going through life and we're like walking through mud, or we have trouble remembering things, or we're losing time, or flashbacks are coming in, this, that, and the other thing, that's a lot of the reason why. It's part of how our brains keep running from that bear.
Right. It's a good visual. We haven't really spoken about it, and we've come not touched on it yet, but we have to before we finish. You and I have quite a few things in common. Um,
Yes.
Many things in common. Like, we both identify as non-binary. Do you identify as trans non-binary? I don't want to put that in your.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
identify as trans non-binary. So, we're both in a multiracial kind of family unit. So our partners are both black.
Yes.
Um, and our kids are um biracial, multiracial, but are perceived as being black. So
Right.
we are white parents of black children, or
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
We have a lovely little queer family, both of us. Um,
Yeah.
so we kind of have a lot of similar experiences. Of course, you are raising your children and in rural North Carolina, slightly different to lovely liberal Scotland, although I used to live in England, which I reckon is about as toxic as rural North Carolina at the moment politically.
Yeah.
But all of those things, and of course we're fat. Like, did I mention that part? I think that was pretty obvious. So we have some understanding of what it's like to hold marginalized identities, or to love someone who holds a marginalized identity, and to witness how that impacts them. Um,
Mhm.
And I'm just like, because we talked about trauma and that's what we've been focusing on today, I'd love to talk about how that intersects with trauma, um, and like, looking at it through that lens. If you, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, to give an example, I went to go vote in the primaries this past week.
Mhm.
And I won't get into everything that happened, but I was not met with kindness by people in the parking lot. So when I got there, it was clear that this was not a safe environment for me. And I think they noticed several things, probably my pink hair, my rainbow watch, my naked lady tattoo, the clothes that I was wearing that were very not rural North Carolina. They were masculine and feminine, and the top was slightly sheer. So there's that, around here, it's kind of, you're supposed to cover everything up. So as soon as I got out of the car, I was met with not kindness. And then when I went in to vote, it was like the um, not believing I was who I said I was.
Mm.
issue when it came to looking at my ID because that's now required here in North Carolina. It was this air of suspicion. And so after that, I had my own trauma response that I needed to work through. And I think, going through the world with multiple intersecting marginalized identities, that's kind of like how that is a lot of times. It's going through daily life, not knowing when those things are going to pop up and we're going to need to deal with them. And the rest of the world is going to expect us to keep functioning as if nothing is wrong, yet it feels like we're enraged and our hearts are breaking and we're activated all at the same time. It is traumatic. So, after an experience like that, which is, by the way, just an intensification of the regular experience of moving through the world every day, where
Yeah.
we pick up on microaggressions from people, right?
Mm.
But we need special self care. And it can be challenging to do that in a world that's telling us we must keep functioning as if nothing is wrong.
Mhm.
I think, you know, we're supposed to still show up for work and smile, and if you happen to share the experience with people who don't have a lived frame of reference for it, they'll be like, "Oh, that's too bad." And it's almost like it's a political thing for them and not a personal thing.
Mm.
So finding personal support. We need spaces with people who share some of our identities so that we can share, and receive support in those safe spaces. That's one thing I love about the waiting room, right? We can go there and share things in our life, good, challenging, or otherwise, and get that support and know that the people who are in that space, sharing that space with us, get it because they're there as well. And
Yeah.
that's kind of like what we need, or at least I know what I need a lot of times in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah, you were saying like the running from the bear analogy. When you are fat and you're navigating the world as a fat, especially a very fat person,
Yeah.
or a super fat, or however you want to identify, or if you're trans, or if you're black, certainly brown and indigenous, the first thing that people will notice, right? Or anything that sort of really sort of separates you, I'm not going to say from the majority, but from the kind of the systems and structures that are in place, that said this is the correct way to be. And so anything that differs from that is the I guess the wrong way to be. And when you're walking around like that, like you're constantly running from a bear because people
Yeah.
just they automatically dislike you. They like without having to do anything, especially if it's really visible. And that's the thing. Like, I'm not saying that invisible things aren't difficult, because they're just as difficult to deal with. But when you have like a visible kind of identity that you can't hide from, you just, even just walking down the street
Mhm.
is is in a way running from a bear. So it's really hard to be like, yeah, we need to regulate our nervous systems. Sure, I mean, like we do, but it's kind of hard because we live in a world that just absolutely refuses to allow us to do that. And also, when you were talking about like that really challenging circumstance that that we are not able to process, of course, our ability to process is, it's much easier if you have multiple privileges. So
Mhm.
on the other side, like we talk about kind of oppression and marginalization, but also if you're privileged, then you just have more resources and you're probably better equipped to deal with difficult situations. Now, that, of course, if you have a history of childhood trauma, that doesn't necessarily apply to you. You'd be very privileged. Like I'm trans, but until recently, I presented as a cis woman and white, and not disabled, and you know fat. But other than that, I would say quite privileged. I had multiple privileges. Um, but then, of course, I had childhood trauma, and so there was a bit of this and a bit of that. But I still think I had the ability to process, even like if I had to, I could take a day off work sick. Like that, even that is such a
Mhm.
privilege to be able to, compared to some people. So You've definitely given us so much food for thought. See, I always keep saying that. It's like boring now. Enough, Asha. You said about community. I could not agree more. It's why I created the waiting room, is because I wanted to start, it was for selfish reasons. I wanted a space where I could hang out with really cool people. And I tell you, they're all really cool. And I used to have a Facebook group. And the problem with the Facebook group, I think there's a problem with Facebook, is that like just everybody can post whatever they want to. And sometimes I could find that in of itself quite triggering, for want of a better word, because someone would post something and I'd be like, I don't actually want to have to deal with that today. So I excuse myself from that community, which is why I'm kind of like really digging the Discord, because with Discord, you go into different rooms or different like channels for different things. So you can avoid the ranty ones when you don't want to rant. And you can go, we've got one called, did I call it fat spirituality? Is that what I called it in the end? Did I
I
call it that?
think so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's my favorite one. So I really
I
like that
love
one.
that
Fat
one.
worship. Fat worship is
Fat
awesome.
worship, yes. The imagery in there is awesome.
Oh,
Yeah.
just like I think we needed to post more and more photos of us like being absolutely awesome. Hazel, who many of you will know and who may well be listening to this, posts some incredible photos, and I was properly jealous and then thought I actually need to get some photos done like this that I can post my own. But it's been quite wonderful building community and having you in my life. I'm so grateful to have met you, and I'm looking forward to further developing our friendship and hopefully working with you in the future. I'm sure that will be a thing. You'll have to come back when the book's done, obviously, to talk about the book more. But like, is there any way that like this is the part of the podcast where I'm supposed to say, where can people find you, Anne? Go.
Okay, well, you could Google me. If you Google me, all kinds of different stuff will come up. But also, if you're on Instagram, you can go to Anne with an E, A-N-N-E, Anne dot Kinsey, Kinsey, Anne dot Kinsey dot writes. Anne Kinsey writes. There's a period between the words. Anne dot Kinsey dot writes. You can find me there. I post a lot of unedited poems where I'll have a poetry prompt kind of like in the morning, usually when I first get up. Sometimes I do it later in the day. And I post whatever is on the top of my head or in my heart, like almost as soon as I wake up in the morning. So a lot of it has to do with intersectional identity, is moving through the world as queer, um, finding joy, fat joy, queer joy, all the joy, healing, whatever's on my heart. And then I do, regular posts as well, where I just talk about life stuff, trauma stuff, try to provide encouragement to people. I hope it's a space that people can come to and feel like they can receive some sort of emotional or spiritual nourishment from what's there. Not religious, spiritual.
Yeah, I was gonna say it is that space. I can say that because I lurk. Um, but yeah, I mean, like, why would you not want to follow Anne now? Like, why would you have listened to this whole thing and not want to follow? And also, thank you so much for, you really like taught me so much in this episode. I don't even care if anyone else has learned from it. I certainly have, and really mine is the most important opinion. We're gonna leave it there. We're gonna wrap up. I would like to say I know what's happening next week. I don't. I haven't planned that far ahead. But it will be something. Like, I'll show up, and that has got to be count for something. Thanks so much, Anne, for being here. See you next time, everyone. Oh no, I don't want to end it. Yes.